Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and we are all in for such a treat in today's episode because we have got an incredible guest whose work has impacted, quite frankly, all of us, every single person here in the United States of America, if you're tuning in from the US, which I know a lot of you are. And also, this is someone who is a pioneer in her industry. And what I love about that is she isn't just a pioneer because she's got the skills, she's got the experience, but also because she's one of us. She's a fellow entrepreneur who has realized, wait, I know all of these things. Let me be even more impactful under my own business and rolling out new technologies, new solutions into the world. So let me introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Janice Kephart. Janice is a national security and identity expert with over 2 decades of experience in identity policy and biometric solutions. If it sounds super complicated, Janice is going to take away a lot of the confusion there. She served as border counsel to the 9/11 Commission and has testified before the U.S. Congress and the UN Security Council on issues of identity and national security. Janice is also the CEO of Identity Strategy Partners and the founder of ZipID, which I'm so excited to hear about that business. Beyond her expertise in national security, she's a spoken word artist and narrator. She's super talented in all the ways. This is someone who's appeared on TV, on a radio, in so many capacities, made it really easy to research her body of work up to this point. She's also released an audiobook of her great-grandfather's work, Cherokees of the Smoky Mountains. I'm personally so excited to hear all the things that go on inside of Janice's head. We're all in for a treat today. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Janice Kephart. All right, Janice, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Heck yes. Well, the first very fun part is I feel like I had to boil down all the cool things that you've done into just a short little snippet. So take us beyond that snippet. Who's Janice? How did you get into all these cool things?
So actually, it's an interesting story. Maybe I got into the issues of counterterrorism and identity. It started way back when in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. My brother-in-law was in the building at the time. He ended up passing away a few months later from complications of the smoke inhalation, and I never forgot how it felt to not hear from him until 5 o'clock. That event happened in February 1993 at the World Trade Center the Trade Center bombing. Terrorists had detonated a parked truck underneath the building, and it happened at about 9 o'clock in the morning. We didn't hear from him until 5 p.m. And then in May of that year, he passed away from complications from the smoke inhalation. So it was very tragic, and I always held that with me. And when I had the opportunity to work for the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, I was strangely and maybe karmically assigned to the counterterrorism subcommittee and technology. It was the counterterrorism technology subcommittee. So I started working on issues of terrorism there, and brought forward a lot of information that was not known at that time about foreign terrorist activity in the United States. And then when 9/11 happened, I was very privileged and honored to be able to support the 9/11 Commission in their investigation. So in the course of all that investigation, it became very clear that the solutions to things were not just policy. The solutions to things that I was dealing with had base in technology as well. And so I became sort of this techno-policy expert, translating technology and policy and facts for the greater good of our country. But being a bit of a maverick and stepping outside of that, I realized that there was only so much good I could do within the confines of the government itself. To really pursue the vision that I had for helping secure our country the way I wanted to, I had to step outside the box and start my own business. And so in 2017, I started a federal services company called Identity Strategy Partners. And then within that, because I'm a lawyer as well, compliance issues around identity emerged. I became an identity biometrics expert. I really focused on that primarily. And ZipID is an evolution of wanting to make sure that a solution could come for a very complex compliance problem that the whole country and the commercial sector had. So it was an opportunity for me to step outside of doing something that was not lucrative at all, and move into something that potentially could make me happy and be lucrative and still provide value. So that's what ZipID is for me today. So right now I'm actually running 2 companies, and hopefully soon just one of them, which will be ZipID. But that's kind of a piece of it. And then the whole creative piece of it also feeds, I believe, strongly into my entrepreneurship too, because I'm willing to take risk and be creative about the solutions that I provide. And that is a different piece of me, but I think essential to who I am. So very mission driven, always have been, but the commercial sector and entrepreneurship in the new way allows me to be happier and do something really valuable for the commercial sector when I've always focused on government. So that kind of is a overview, I guess, of where I am now.
I love that overview, Janice. I'm so appreciative of the way that you spelled that out, and very appreciative of your work and the fact that, hey, you're preaching to the choir here as an entrepreneur, a fellow entrepreneur, is that we can have so much more impact when we go out under our own umbrella. You and I were joking together off air before we hit record about the fact that you are a subject matter expert that is so well established over the course of your career. I found clips of you talking on CNN, testifying in front of Congress, testifying at the United Nations, and so many important roles that you've played. Where my head goes, Janice, is I'm just like, you're so good at all these things you do. I always think about, if you want to be a practitioner, but you talk about the Maverick inside of you. You said, I also want to be in charge of negotiating contracts and getting clients and building new tech solutions and marketing and branding and all of these things. Where did that come from, Janice? Because I love the fact that there was an entrepreneur living behind all of that subject matter expertise you built.
I think it's the creative piece. I think it's the creative side of me. It's the, what more can I do? How much further can I push myself? Where is my limit? Am I good at everything, Brian? No, I'm not. I'm not good at everything. But there's a lot I am good at. And what I'm really, really good at, and I found out, was that even though I'm a lawyer by trade, I'm kind of a solution engineer in my head. So I love problems and solving them. And I've been doing that with the government for ages. And maybe I got a little confident I could do it well. And then I was like, okay, so I can solve problems. There's this one particular problem that ZipID is solving, niche. I'm killing it. We're going to be next generation, the whole thing. But what more can I do? How much more can I push myself? And who do I need to surround myself with? Maybe it's not just the government policy people. Maybe the way entrepreneurs think and people who support entrepreneurs is so different, as you can imagine, from the way the government thinks. It's nearly completely the opposite. I'm much more in line with the way entrepreneurs think than I am with government. And so I am forcing myself to learn a lot of things that I haven't before, but I'm also surrounding myself with the people that know how to get this stuff done when I don't have the answers. So branding and that sort of thing, that's my creative side. Am I perfect at it? No, but I have the ideas and I can help know where to go to get the help to execute. So the entrepreneurship piece of this for me is having a mission and having a vision that's bigger than the product, and then being able to execute all of that and seeing what I can do. And I guess I like to take risk, and that's a big part of it too. I don't mind. I don't mind the risk. I enjoy it. So
yeah, I love that, Janice. I want to go a little bit deeper into ZipID because I love that delicate balance that you talk about between the way that government thinks and the way that, I'll just lump in, traditional institutions think about things versus entrepreneurship. Because the second our team landed on ZipID's website, first things first, it looks beautiful and it looks like something that an entrepreneur innovates and puts out into the marketplace. Because here we are talking about I-9 compliance, which I'm sure is not the most exciting thing, but Janice, I do want you I want you to introduce listeners to that. But what I want to interject before I toss it back to you is the fact that you've taken something like that and applied technology that when I scroll through your website, I think to myself, obviously I'm far removed from the job market, but I think to myself, why is this not the way it's already existing? Like, thank you, Janice, for bringing us into the current and the future day. Talk to us about that, because it is going into an archaic, dare I say, world, and applying entrepreneurial, innovative thinking to bring a new solution to the market.
Right. So the super fun part about this is that government can't get beyond itself often. And I've worked deep in government. I still contract with the government. They can't get out of their own way. So the federal government has put the whole Form I-9 issue that you mentioned. So the federal government has put on every single employer in the United States the requirement to legally authorize their new hires before they start work, as they start work, within 3 days of starting work, to be technically compliant. And in doing so, you have to prove that the person both has legal authorization to work and their identity. But the fact of the matter is, the government has provided, and this is part of our secret sauce, 96 different compare IDs to use to complete this form. And then the employer is supposed to look at those IDs and look at the person and go, oh yeah, it's the same person. But you know what? If they get it wrong, that is where worksite enforcement, if you've ever heard the term immigration and customs enforcement doing worksite enforcement, they're doing it on the I-9. And if any part of that I-9 is inaccurate, you get fined extensively. So to me, this is an unfair burden to put on employers. Why can't the government solve this? They have a program called E-Verify, but E-Verify doesn't verify identity at all. It verifies your social security number, and that is it. And employers don't really know that, but that is the truth. So basically what I'm doing is I'm enabling the government to do what they want it to do, but have never been able to implement, because they've refused to use the biometric technologies that are available and super accurate now to help do the identity authentication portion. So I am providing identity authentication along with a completely automated, streamlined, always accurate completion of this form. It seems like something that should have been done years ago, but there are a lot of players in this market and nobody's done it. So that's where we're starting with ZipID. I have bigger plans in the future, but we're starting with this little form, and I'm going to get this market under my belt, and then we're going to go further than that.
Yeah, I love that, Janice. I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot for some of the entrepreneurial mindset stuff here, because when I look at the course of your career, you're so comfortable talking about all things identity, even the technicalities. The lawyer in you came out, Janice, when you're talking about the 3-day timeline for I-9 compliance. And when I think about that, your business obviously is the fruit of so much of the stuff that you had done leading up to it. And I think about all entrepreneurs, we all have our inner mindset struggles when we start our business of who am I to be doing this? And a lot of people will probably look at your example, Janice, and say, okay, testifying in front of Congress, testifying in front of the United Nations, 9/11 Commission work, all of these things that you've done. And they probably think, well, for Janice, this is easy. All the doors are already open to her. She's got the credibility. She's got the connections. Give us the reality. What's that picture actually look like?
There's a lot of competition. I'm brand new. And, you know, when you're a startup, people worry about your viability, right? Your long-term viability. So I have to put us on the map and accelerate us. The biggest challenge, I will say, Brian, is that there are 72 million new hires in the US a year. Can you imagine the demographic I'm trying to figure out? We've got remote workers, we've got in-person hires, we've got all different types of industries in the US with all have different, believe it or not, customer discovery has shown all different issues with the I-9, all different types of pain points. So I'm literally trying to ball it all up and give a solution that bubbles up the biggest pain points and then also offer something that nobody ever thought was possible, which is the identity authentication piece on top of it. And we were successful in getting the federal government to change the regulation to allow for a digital type of solution like ours now. So that was a win. But yes, I have the credibility, But my other issue is I'm known in the identity sector and I'm known in government. I'm not known in who my demographic is, who is human resources. So I've been working extremely hard to try to pull my knowledge of identity and build my my following and educational piece of this, which there's a big educational piece with this, to the HR world. But it's a challenge. And I am trying to figure out all the CRM around this and the best way to go to market and to market this. And we have a lot of ideas and we're bouncing them around. But as you know, as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to throw a few things at the wall and see what sticks, and then go where your clients want you to go. And so that's what I'm trying to keep my ears open to them and not make this a Janice show in any stretch of the way.
Yeah, really well said. So many important considerations. And speaking of challenges, Janice, as you were just rattling some of those off, I actually hadn't thought of remote work. How has that changed? When I was a teenager and started working, you go in and they physically look at all of your documentation. I hadn't even thought about the differences of today's work environment. That said, you're building a technology solution around all of this. Yes. We've all heard the term of MVP, minimum viable product. Janice, how the heck do you even sit down with such a big problem? You're talking tens of millions of people every single year. What's your MVP look like? What did that roadmap to launch look like? How did you make sense of it?
So I was extremely lucky. There was a senior, I had responded to a request for information years ago in the federal government to this. A very large company came to my firm, said, can you help us devise a solution? They didn't understand what we were talking about. So we went off and we submitted our own response. And the very, very senior government official loved it. And when he left, he brought all of his internal knowledge of the I-9s, the statistics of how it was used, what IDs were used. And he asked to join the ZipID team. And for about a year and a half, he and I worked on the workflow. So the point of the workflow is you don't have to know anything about this I-9 at all. Nothing. You just come in and you just push buttons and it tells you what to do and the form will be autofilled. So that is sort of the core of it. But what we've done is it's super frictionless. It's completely built up based upon technology so that all the information would be auto-filled off of the IDs themselves, which makes the form accurate. And then we're doing a one-to-one between a selfie that we're requiring and the ID so that the employer can make a decision if they're confident that that person is who they say they are, the ID and the selfie match. And then we're auto-filling everything on the employer side. And we're fulfilling some pain points that employers have as well, because not only do they have the remote worker issue, they have transparency across location issue. So I talk to many people, charter schools, health organizations that have locations in multiple states, and they don't know what's happening in the I-9s in the other states because other managers are doing them. And they know that they're liable if Immigration and Customs Enforcement comes along and does an audit. They're liable for anything done wrong in those other locations. So we've built transparency throughout the entire employer dashboard. You know exactly where every I-9 at every location and which HR person is working on them. We give you reminders. We're audit ready. We'll retain the data as you need, all with encryption. Nothing leaves our platform. So all personally identifiable information is secure. I used all of my lessons learned from all the failures and successes of biometric companies and identity companies that I know, because I know all the vendors. And I put that to work as well in this solution. So hopefully I wouldn't have made any mistakes, any huge mistakes as we launch. We're not going to be perfect when we launch. We're going to have a very strong minimum viable product, but as development goes, things drop because you can't get it done on time. And so there will be details, little details lost, but we'll catch up to them very soon after we launch. Right now, we're working to get those initial clients in, and people are loving what they're seeing. They're loving the UI. They're like, oh my God, this is, wow. We're taking it from about 35 minutes to about 5 minutes total.
That's crazy. All right. Well, then, Janice, I'm going to ask you this question that when I hear cases like this, I've been asking this question more and more lately, and that is, it sounds like a no-brainer. Like, where's the stumbling block? Because for me, obviously, I'm not having these conversations. I'm just talking to you on a podcast, and I'm a big fan of the work that you do. Especially, you called out the UI. That's what immediately stands out to me, and that's what, for me, I immediately recognize, oh, this is not a government solution because this actually looks good and it actually functions well, and it's so clear to see that. So with that said, it sounds to me like if I'm an employer and I have to fill out the I-9, why wouldn't I use ZipID? Why wouldn't I go all in on something like this? Talk to me about some of the stumbling blocks or some of the objections that you've already foreseen and said, no, we're going to have a way to counteract that and really penetrate the market.
So the biggest issue is not my product, because people really like my product. The problem is there are these huge human resource information systems that already exist, and they have like a PDF version of the Form I-9. It's not worth it to them to like upset the entire balance of their entire HR system, which often is both onboarding and then it's payroll as well. So there's a lot to it's the Bamboos and the Workdays, those kinds of ADP. So to include the I-9 piece in, I am building the B2B piece of this. So we'll have 3 different varieties of B2B APIs that can be used by these larger companies. And we're learning, which I was surprised, that background check companies are also extremely interested in what I'm doing because of the identity authentication piece of it, that they can use do both onboarding and identity authentication at the same time, which is huge to the background check folks. So it turns out I actually have a bigger market than I thought I had. But it's also a challenge because they can be kind of frenemies, right? Until I make them my friends, they're kind of my enemies, right? So that's the biggest challenge I have right now, is getting inserted into a market that's relatively thick, but has poor I-9 products out there right now. Extremely poor, actually. So that's the biggest struggle.
That's super interesting to hear about the landscape of it, because you're right. There's so many different stakeholders and you can plug in anywhere. I guess this question is not to Janice, the subject matter expert, but more towards Janice, the founder, the fellow entrepreneur. And that is, when you look at that landscape, how do you pick? I guess it's a question of both business model as far as monetization and revenue strategies, but also, of course, we all need to pick our ideal customer. And with such a broad market, it's almost a blessing and a curse, I would imagine, that some days you debate yourself internally of which way should we go. How do you navigate that?
So I have spent a tremendous amount of time exactly on that question. The customer discovery never really clarified who my customer was, because it was still everybody, because every employer has to do this, right? So the usual thing that you do in entrepreneurial school, right, is you figure out your demographic. But my demographic has never really narrowed. So what we've done is we've focused on the employers out there who usually have the highest turnover. Your construction industry, your travel and industries. Then there's also a different type, which are your technology companies who love cutting edge products, right? And have a lot of remote workers. So we have sort of the remote work piece, and then we have the large turnover and hires. The large turnover and hires get us a lot of transactions, right? And I need that, right, to build. But the remote worker, the technology companies might are gravitating to us because of we're bringing something new to the table and they like that. So it's kind of 2 separate segments. And then we have that third segment, which would be our channel partners, which is our B2B. And that is going to be our biggest segment of all, I think. That in the end is going to be our biggest segment of all, as I see it. Those are kind of our 3 demographics that I would. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, for sure. I love hearing the way you think about it as well. Not just the answer, but I really love hearing the way you navigate that. You already know, Janice, how much I enjoy switching gears in these conversations towards the end, which time always flies by in these episodes. But I so cherish getting inside the mind of the entrepreneur as well. And what's really clear to me, Janice, about you is that I think you share in one of my beliefs that everything that we do is a microcosm of life, and business is a microcosm of life. And you brought it up a few times in our conversation today about how much the creative side of what you do. You're obviously a spoken songwriter. You are a vocalist of trip poetry. You do so many, I love youngins these days, generations younger than me, they call it side quests. And I love that concept of doing side quests. Janice, I know though how important those so-called side quests are to your work and the way you see the world. Talk to us about that. I think it's such an important part of who you are and how you operate.
Yeah, so for me, for years I'll be completely honest, for years, because what I was doing publicly, very publicly on the policy side was so heavy. I was talking about terrorism and border security and identity, and it was super heavy. And then I had this other side that was very sort of intellectual / emotional, which was my spoken word and my poetry. And I got to this point where like people at the Recording Academy, the Grammys, were noticing me, and they asked me to join up because I was doing something that they had never heard before, which was spoken word to truly to real music, right? Like writing music around the spoken word and the poetry, which hadn't been done quite the way that I do it. And so that piece of it, I kept them really separate for a long time because there were, when you're very public, not everybody wants to approve of what you're doing. And when you're in a very state environment like DC, being creative is some people consider a no-no. But more recently, in recent years, I decided to let go of the concern that people knew that I was an artist as well. And allow them to begin to merge. And so that is where I get the narrative for a historical writing, etc. It drives me when I go to do my work for ZipID. Every morning, the first thing I think is what the creative side. It always is that. It's the branding, it's the marketing, it's how I'm stating our vision, it's how I'm talking to other people, what we're doing there. And then I'm letting sort of other people take care of the finances and that sort of thing. But it's sort of the marrying of a vision and purpose. Vision, purpose, product. Vision, purpose, product. And it all, if I'm doing something creative, it's still vision, purpose, product. If I'm doing ZipID, it's still vision, purpose, product. If I'm talking before the Senate, it's still vision, purpose, the product being the idea, right? So it all is kind of the same thing, but it's just different wheels turning on different vehicles a little bit. But it's in the end, it's kind of the same for me. I think my mind just works like that. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Janice. I've never asked anyone this question, but I think that you are the perfect one to talk directly to our audience about this. It's not the most fully fleshed out question, but I trust that you'll understand where I'm going with it. When I hear you talk about this, what I really hear, and obviously I'm tying it in with the background information that I have about you, and I know that part of your superpower is getting people on board with a good idea. And I would argue that that's an essential part for every single one of us as entrepreneurs, as leaders, just as people on this planet. And so when I combine it with the things that you just shared with us, what I really hear is you own your voice and you've stepped into your voice. And Janice, I will say as a podcaster, I'm fully aware of the moment when that happened for me. It was not episode 1. It was not when I hit record for the first time. It was a few hundred episodes in, because you get used to it. How often colloquially do we hear people say, oh, I hate the sound of my own voice? And to me, I'm just like, oh no, but your voice is your power. Your voice can do so much good with the world. Janice, how would you, what's your insights in helping people to navigate to that point? Because our voice is part of that power in convincing others of good ideas, in moving people, in getting people to feel the way that we want to invite them to feel. But the voice is such a sensitive topic for most people. What would you say on that topic?
Oh, geez. So that's a really interesting question. And one that requires some really good thought. But let me see if I can articulate a little bit of where to go here. I think the biggest piece is that you got to have in your gut, in your heart, in your mind, why you're doing what you're doing. And when you start with the place of, I'm doing something valuable, and that means something to other people, and it provides value to other people into my world, that voice has to come out. So is it easy? No. You need to build your facts. You need to hone and hone and hone. Even today, when I was getting ready for this interview, I wrote a whole bunch of notes and then I rewrote them. And then I got it down to a few sentences and I rewrote again. I'm not sure I said any of what I wrote down, but it let me think through what I'm doing. Preparation means something. Yes, go with your gut, but preparation matters. Knowing what you're talking about matters, and feeling it matters. It is true not to overthink, but you got to think. You do have to think. And then you have to believe with that passion of what it is that you're doing. Not angrily. And another thing is balance. And I think we've lost balance and diplomacy in our society very much these days. And it's very sad for me to say, but you're most influential when you're balanced in what you say, when people are not rocking back on their heels going, oh no, right? They're not putting their hands up. They're going, wait, what? And they're leaning in. So be balanced, be clear, be thoughtful, and know what you're doing is of value. And if it's not of value, maybe you keep it to yourself. But if you really think it's of value, then figure out how to articulate it and practice it. Practice does make maybe not perfect, but better.
So well said, Janice. Listeners know that there are no canned questions here on the show, and I love the fact that you shared with listeners, yeah, of course you have notes on your end and you have an idea and a direction, but ultimately what I'm really hearing from so many of your answers here today is the belief, the conviction, the why that you spoke about. That's what guides so much of it. And I will say it's a personal point of pride when I hear that guests come on the show with some preparation and then they're like, I didn't end up saying any of these things. And it's because we go where the conversation has that good juicy stuff waiting. And I know that listeners are going to deeply resonate with what you just shared because it is hard. And I love the fact that you and I are calling this out on a podcast episode that neither of us were born here, and it was a lot of reps, a lot of ugly reps, a lot of bad reps.
And I will say, Brian, like I never expected in the world to ever be a public figure, ever. I was a staff lawyer in the Senate before 9/11 happened. I got dragged to testify before the Senate, and with all the cameras and everything, and I managed to hold my own, and I ended up on national TV that night, and then I became a darling of national TV for the next 10 years from about 2004 to 2014 or so. And so I never ever expected, as a mom of 3 kids, to be doing what I do for a living. And I feel incredibly blessed and incredibly honored to have had the career I have. But being an entrepreneur will let me go entrepreneur in a different way than I have been to date. And doing the work that I'm doing now is a way to really spread my wings in a way that is mine and still valuable for the rest of the world, instead of just being about the rest of the world. And it's just so exciting for me to be able to share those thoughts. But there's so many people have great ideas. And, making sure that idea has value in the world, people call it doing customer discovery or discovering the pain points or whatever, so important. So, be convicted in what you do, but be diplomatic, and people will resonate with you a whole lot more. That one I just have to keep saying because you are that way, but we hear a lot of things these days that are very vitriolic.
Yeah, and Janice, I'll tag on to that. This is just going to be you and I really hammering this point home together. But I'll say early on in my entrepreneurial career, I'm 17 plus years into this journey, and I felt like I didn't fit in because so much of the marketing advice out there is about you have to be polarizing, you have to push people away so that you draw people in. And I was just like, no, I enjoy people feeling better after they encounter me. And that's part of the role that I play. And Janice, it's so cool to hear that from your vantage vantage point, someone who has worked in DC so extensively, someone who is in probably the most polarizing industry of all when it comes to policy and all of that. Yeah. So that's such an important takeaway. I'm only going to put you on the spot one more time. It's the only question that I ask at the end of every episode. I don't know how you're going to top what you've already shared, but I do want to ask you for your one best piece of advice, knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys. They're all going to have a lot of takeaways from this, Janice, but what's the one thing you want to leave them with today?
Believe in what you do. Believe in what you do, because there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of money you put on the line. There's a lot of adversity and that's coming at you from a lot of different places. And if you don't know in your gut that what you're doing is powerful, you're not going to make it. You have to wake up every day and be able to put aside the adversity and march forward. And that's what I would say is you need to believe in your gut and what you're doing.
Boom. I love that. Believe it not just through words, but believe it down to your very bones. That is so important for all of us, Janice. And it's not something we can do once. We have to constantly go there with ourselves and check in. So I love that advice for our listeners. I'm super excited to follow your journey from here. I know that listeners are going to want to check out. I've tooted your horn quite a bit as far as a UI perspective.
You've been very kind.
I want people to see the UI because it's so different from what we're used to in these archaic ways of doing things, especially when it comes to compliance. So Janice, for all the listeners who want to see it in action, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Okay, so our website is zipidapp.com, zipidapp.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn under Janice Kephart, and I'm sure Brian will be spelling out my name. Find me on LinkedIn. I also have a Substack where I do talk about technology and politics, and it's called Apolitics and Poetry, thejanicekepart.com on Substack. So, and we're happy to start. We're doing demos now. I'm happy to take people through it. And if they have compliance issues, a lot of HR people are not fond of the Form I-9. So if there are any HR people out there listening or other companies that are interested in what we're doing, come find me and we'll get you hooked up at zipidapp.com.
Listeners, you already know the drill. Janice made my life easy from her radio work. She knows that we're dropping all that information down below in the show notes. You don't have to remember anything, especially if you're on the go. Check out the show notes no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. You can click right on through to ZipID's website. We're also linking to Janice's personal LinkedIn as well as her Substack and all those links that she just mentioned. So check the show notes out down below. Otherwise, Janice, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brian. It was really a joy. It really was.